picture this. It's 6:30 in the morning. Your alarm goes off.
And you're already tired.
Right, exactly. Before your feet have even touched the floor, before you've even fully opened your eyes, your hand is already reaching for the nightstand.
Going straight for the phone.
Going right for the phone. And the screen lights up, and there it is. Just like a literal wall of notifications.
Oh, yeah. The worst way to wake up.
It really is. You've got, 3 urgent emails from your boss, a breaking news alert that immediately spikes your cortisol, and just a complete barrage of social media updates.
Yeah.
I mean, you haven't even had a glass of water yet, and you already feel fundamentally, hopelessly behind schedule.
Well, it sets this physiological trap for the rest of the day, really, because when you open your eyes and immediately consume external demands, you're actually triggering a stress response.
Like a fight or flight kind of thing.
Exactly. You are flooding your system with adrenaline before your brain has even transitioned out of its natural sleep cycles. It sets a profoundly reactive tone for the next 16 hours of your life.
Wow. And that reactive tone is actually the core of our deep dive today. Welcome in, by the way. Today we are looking at a really fascinating narrative case study. And this is drawn from an advanced English learning curriculum.
It's a great piece of material.
It really is. Because our mission today is to decode a very specific, highly consequential distinction. And that is the exact difference between being a busy performer and being a high performer.
Two very different things.
Completely different. We're going to explore the mechanics of how completely reprogramming your morning can fundamentally transform your trajectory. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, I think the best entry point into this material is to look at the subject of our case study. So the text introduces this guy named Ethan.
Right, Ethan.
Yeah, he's a 38-year-old senior management consultant, and he works with these massive multinational companies. He travels internationally all the time.
So he's doing well.
Oh, incredibly well. If you look at his life on paper, you see just unmitigated success. He has the respected career, the financial stability, the impressive resume.
Right, the perfect LinkedIn profile, basically.
Well, exactly.
But the internal reality is a completely different universe.
Yes.
Mentally, the text says Ethan is just completely exhausted, like he's drowning in endless meetings, relentless deadlines, and this crushing pressure to just constantly perform.
And that brings us right back to that morning scenario we were just talking about. Ethan's old morning routine was basically an exercise in daily self-sabotage.
Yeah, waking up feeling rushed.
Rushed, drained, and spending those critical first moments of the day still laying in bed, just absorbing all the chaos of the world straight from his screen.
So what's actually happening in his brain when he does that?
Well, the mechanism at play there is cognitive overload. When Ethan starts his day by reading urgent emails in bed, he is forcing his brain to process complex problem-solving tasks while it's still in a state of sleep inertia.
Sleep inertia.
Right. He is asking his prefrontal cortex, which is the logical decision-making part of the brain, to sprint before it has even warmed up.
It makes me think of an analogy. I mean, Ethan's old morning routine is basically like walking into a gym, finding a treadmill that is already running at its absolute maximum speed and just trying to jump onto the belt.
Oh, that's a brutal image, but it's totally accurate.
Right, because you aren't stepping on and gradually increasing the speed. You are throwing yourself into chaos and just hoping you don't get thrown against the wall.
And the thing is, Ethan recognizes this friction. The source material shares this really poignant internal monologue where he asks himself, and I'm quoting here, "Am I managing my day or is my day managing me?"
Yeah, that's heavy. And then he asks another question that really anchors this whole discussion.
Right.
He says, when did being busy become more important than being present?
Yeah.
Which makes me wonder, are we as a society just entirely mistaking a full inbox for a fulfilling life? I mean, I have to ask, isn't being busy kind of the entire point of having a high-powered career?
See, I would challenge that premise.
Okay.
I mean, modern society definitely celebrates busyness. We treat exhaustion as a status symbol.
We really do. The whole hustle culture.
Right. If you are constantly rushing, constantly answering messages at all hours, the assumption is that you must be indispensable. But what this case study highlights is that busyness and effectiveness are two entirely different metrics.
How so?
Well, busyness is about motion. Effectiveness is about progress. You can spend 12 hours reacting to emails, constantly moving, typing away, and accomplish absolutely nothing of deep strategic value.
Because you're just on the defensive. You're basically playing whack-a-mole with your inbox.
Exactly.
You're swatting away ping pong balls instead of actually moving the needle on the big projects. And the text shows that Ethan hits a wall with this. He realizes he can't keep jumping on that max speed treadmill every day.
Something had to break.
Right. So he makes a causal shift. He takes a short, completely tech-free vacation to just disconnect. And during this trip, he wanders into a quiet, independent bookstore. And he discovers this stack of books that completely challenge his perspective on productivity.
And that tech-free environment is key. Stepping away from the technology is what finally gave his brain the cognitive space, like the literal bandwidth, to actually absorb new ideas without immediate distraction.
He wasn't getting pinged every 5 minutes.
Exactly. So the literature he dives into starts with a book called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. And this book argues that extraordinary lives are built through intentional mornings rather than rushed beginnings.
Okay, I want to push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because I think a lot of people listening to this deep dive are already super familiar with the concept of a morning routine. We hear it all the time, right? Wake up early, do some yoga, drink your green juice.
Right, the influencer morning routine.
Yeah, it can feel a bit cliche at this point. So what is the actual substance here beyond just waking up earlier?
That is a crucial distinction to make, because waking up early is just a temporal shift. It's just moving the clock. What the source material is pointing to is intentionality.
Intentionality.
Yes. High performers don't simply work harder or longer hours than everyone else. What they actually do is recover better, and they aggressively protect their attention. The morning routine isn't about cramming more tasks into the day. It is about establishing a fortress around your cognitive resources before the rest of the world starts making demands on you.
Okay, protecting your attention. That actually bridges perfectly into the next text Ethan studies, which I know a lot of you listening have probably read. It's Atomic Habits by James Clear.
A classic.
Yeah. Now, we all know the basic premise of building habits, but how does Ethan actually apply this to his morning without falling into that trap of just, trying really hard for 3 days and then quitting?
Well, he shifts his focus completely away from motivation and entirely towards systems. And this is a profound shift in understanding human behavior.
Because we usually think we need to feel motivated to do something hard.
Exactly. We wait for a burst of inspiration. But motivation is deeply tied to our emotional state, which fluctuates based on how well we slept, what we ate, or, what stressful email we just read.
Motivation is incredibly flaky.
It really is.
I look at motivation like a cheap sugar rush. You watch a hype video on YouTube, you get this massive spike of dopamine, you feel incredibly pumped up.
And then
2 hours later, you crash, and you are right back exactly where you started.
Precisely. And the text highlights that identity changes through repeated actions, not occasional flashes of inspiration. Neurologically speaking, when you rely on a system, you are utilizing your basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia.
Yeah, it's the part of the brain responsible for automated behaviors. You don't have to feel like doing it. You just execute the system. The friction of choice is completely removed.
So you don't even have to debate with yourself.
Exactly. And Ethan reflects on this with a really powerful thought from the book. He says, every morning is a vote for the person I'm becoming.
Every morning is a vote for the person I'm becoming. I mean, I love that phrasing. But let me challenge the reality of it for a second.
Go for it.
It sounds great on paper, but when the alarm goes off at 6 a.m. and you are just dead exhausted, relying on a system sounds a bit robotic. Like, how does Ethan avoid just becoming a highly scheduled machine? Why do we naturally resist taking the action that we know will cast the right vote?
We resist because casting that vote requires upfront energy. It's hard. But the text proves that taking the action itself is what actually creates the new identity.
The action comes first.
Right. You don't become a runner and then start running. You run, and through the repetition of that action, your brain actually rewires itself to adopt the identity of a runner.
Oh, that makes sense.
So the system isn't a robotic constraint. It is the scaffolding that holds you up on the days when your motivation is at absolute zero.
So the system is the architecture, not the energy source. Okay, but the narrative progresses here, because getting out of bed with a purpose is really only step one. It's about how Ethan manages his actual brain once he is awake, right? The source material starts shifting from just physical morning habits to cognitive resilience.
Right, because if we connect this to the bigger picture, the structure of his morning is essentially useless if the quality of his thinking remains poor.
Yeah, if he's still stressed.
Exactly. So to explore mental resilience, Ethan turns to Mindset by Carol S. Dweck, because he has to confront how he processes setbacks.
Because the old Ethan, the overwhelmed Ethan, would hit a roadblock at work, and his internal voice would immediately go to self-criticism. He would ask, why am I failing?
And that specific question triggers a threat response in the brain. It activates the amygdala.
The fear center.
Right. But by adopting a growth mindset, Ethan starts using his morning journal for cognitive restructuring. The question he asks himself changes entirely.
What does he ask instead?
Instead of, why am I failing? He asks, what is this experience teaching me?
Wow. That simple pivot in language changes a setback from a permanent indictment of his character into just a temporary data point for future success.
It moves the processing from the emotional center of the brain back to the logical center.
Exactly. But to process that data, he needs sustained focus, which brings him to the next book, Cal Newport's Deep Work.
A phenomenal concept.
Yeah, Ethan realizes that constant, relentless interruptions have deeply fragmented his thinking. His brain has been trained to basically crave the dopamine hit of the next message.
Because he was beginning every single day in a reactive state.
Right. So what is the mechanism he uses to fix this? Instead of opening his inbox first thing, he schedules 90 minutes of completely uninterrupted work every single morning.
No email.
No emails, no Slack notifications, no quick chats, just pure, deep, focused concentration.
Well, what's fascinating here is the biology behind that specific 90-minute window. It actually ties into our ultradian rhythms.
Our ultradian rhythms.
Yeah, just as we sleep in 90-minute cycles, our brains operate in 90-minute cycles of peak alertness during the day. So by blocking out distractions, Ethan is basically riding the biological wave of his highest cognitive capacity.
But wait, in a corporate environment, especially for a management consultant, isn't 90 minutes offline kind of dangerous? People expect immediate replies. Doesn't he risk dropping the ball on something urgent by ignoring his inbox?
That is the common fear, definitely. But it's largely an illusion. Newport's work shows that the cost of constantly checking inboxes is something called attention residue.
Attention residue. What is that?
When you glance at an email and then try to return to a complex task, a portion of your attention actually remains stuck on that email you just read.
Oh, like it's running in the background.
Exactly. So your overall cognitive capacity is reduced. By scheduling 90 minutes of unbroken focus, Ethan produces more high-level strategic output than he previously did in 4 hours of fragmented multitasking.
So he's completely eliminating the attention residue.
He is.
And that intersection leads us right into the next concept he explores, which is from The Power of Full Engagement by Jim Lower and Tony Schwartz. Ethan discovers that managing your energy is vastly more important than managing your time.
And this raises a really important question about how we fundamentally approach productivity. We are just so obsessed with time management.
Yeah, we slice our calendars into tiny 15-minute blocks.
Right. But time is a finite, static resource. Energy, on the other hand, is dynamic.
You know, let me throw out an original analogy here, because this concept completely shifted how I view my own schedule.
Let's hear it.
Think about it like having a smartphone. You have 24 hours in a day to use your phone. That 24 hours is your time. But if the battery is completely dead, if your energy is at 0%, that time is completely useless to you.
That's spot on.
Right. You can have all the time in the world, the newest phone, perfect condition. But if the battery is dead, you can't make a call, you can't send a text, you can't do anything. Time without energy is just an empty vessel.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. Ethan realizes that trying to simply work longer hours is a losing game. The battery drains. The more time he spends pushing through fatigue, the lower the quality of his work becomes.
Diminishing returns.
Exactly. Instead, he learns he must balance that intense 90-minute concentration with purposeful recovery.
Okay, so what does purposeful recovery actually mean? It doesn't mean just scrolling social media, right?
No, absolutely not. Because scrolling is still consuming cognitive energy. You're still draining the battery.
Right.
Purposeful recovery means stepping away from screens entirely. It means taking regular breaks, getting physical movement, ensuring healthy sleep, and practicing mindfulness.
Doing things that actually put charge back in the battery.
Yes. These activities don't drain the battery, they recharge it. They increase his baseline resilience.
So he's treating himself like a high-performance athlete rather than, a machine that is supposed to just run 24/7.
Precisely.
So we've talked a lot about the theory. How do all these concepts actually look in practice? Because the source material details Ethan's completely redesigned morning routine to show the tangible results of all this reading.
Yeah, the application is where it matters.
Because the friction is always in the implementation.
The transformation in his routine is striking because it layers all of these mechanisms together. So first, he wakes up without checking his phone. The reactive cortisol trigger is just completely eliminated.
Replaced by what?
He replaces it with 10 minutes of mindfulness.
Which physically thickens the prefrontal cortex over time, improving his impulse control.
Right. Then he reads a chapter from a meaningful book. So he is engaging in slow, deliberate consumption rather than rapid, fragmented scrolling.
That's a huge difference.
It is. After that, he writes down his 3 absolute priorities for the day. He is setting the agenda before anyone else can set it for him. Then he exercises before work to spike his endorphins and clear out any remaining sleep inertia.
And because this case study actually comes from an advanced English learning curriculum, there is a fascinating linguistic layer to his new routine as well.
Yes, there is.
While he eats breakfast, he is focused on intentional learning. So he listens to an advanced English podcast.
And his approach to language learning mirrors his approach to productivity. He isn't just, memorizing isolated vocabulary lists. He is actively reviewing advanced collocations and academic vocabulary.
Hold on. For anyone listening who isn't a linguist, can we quickly define what a collocation is and why it actually matters?
Certainly. So a collocation is a group of words that naturally go together in a language.
Okay.
For example, in English, we say heavy rain, not strong rain, even though the literal meaning of the words is very similar.
Oh, right. Strong rain just sounds weird to a native speaker.
Exactly. By studying these lexical chunks, specifically words related to leadership, psychology, economics, and innovation, Ethan bypasses the slow process of translating word by word in his head.
He's learning the chunks instead of the pieces.
Yes, and that reduces his cognitive load when he's speaking in these high-pressure meetings.
So he's basically building systems for his vocabulary, just like he is building systems for his morning routine.
Exactly.
He's reading high-quality publications in English, absorbing the sophisticated sentence structures naturally, and he finishes this entire morning sequence by reflecting on one lesson he learned from the previous day in his journal.
The growth mindset in action.
Yeah, taking the data and processing it.
And now, observe the compound interest of these habits. By studying English vocabulary in use, advanced and engaging with high-level material every single day, his confidence in his multinational meetings just skyrockets.
Because he's prepared.
He isn't just managing his time better, his actual capacity to communicate complex, nuanced ideas to international clients has leveled up.
Because he's no longer rushing into work completely flustered. He begins every single morning with absolute clarity. And as you said, this consistency compounds.
It really does.
The narrative in the case study flashes forward several months. This whole transformation culminates in Ethan being invited to deliver a keynote presentation at a major international leadership conference.
Right. He stands on that stage not as the exhausted, burnt-out consultant he used to be, but as a genuine thought leader. And he unpacks the exact question that started his whole journey. What separates high performers from busy performers?
The answer he gives is brilliant, honestly, because it strips away all the glamorous myths of success.
Yeah, he explains to the audience that success is rarely determined by innate talent alone. Talent is just the baseline.
It just gets you in the door.
Right. True. Sustainable success is shaped by mundane daily habits. It's shaped by emotional resilience, by intentional learning, and most critically in our modern era, by the ability to aggressively protect one's attention in a world that is literally designed to distract you.
I want to read the exact quote he uses to conclude his keynote, because it perfectly encapsulates the reality of the friction we discussed earlier. He tells the audience, and I quote, "A successful morning doesn't guarantee a successful life, but thousands of intentional mornings gradually create one."
That is the ultimate testament to the architecture of systems. Thousands of individual votes cast for the identity of a high performer.
Right.
It isn't about one perfect day. It is about the resilient average of your days.
Wow. I want to pause for a second and turn this right over to you, the listener. Think about your morning today, or think about tomorrow morning. If you had to write down your top 3 priorities for the day right now, before you were allowed to check a single screen, before you look at a single email, what would they be?
Do you even know?
Right. Do you even know?
Because if you don't know your priorities before you open your inbox, I guarantee you someone else's priorities are going to fill that void immediately.
Your boss, your clients.
That is the harsh reality of the modern workplace. If you do not claim your attention, someone else will gladly spend it for you.
So what does this all mean for us? Synthesizing everything from Ethan's journey, the ultimate takeaway here is a complete redefinition of the word productive.
True productivity is not about doing more.
No.
It is not about cramming an impossible number of tasks into a shrinking window of time just to look busy. It is about becoming more thoughtful, more focused, more resilient, and more present.
Yeah.
Excellence does not begin when you sit down at your desk or when you log into your first Zoom meeting of the day. It begins long before that. It begins with the very first neurological choices you make when you wake up. Every single sunrise offers you a renewed opportunity to basically reset your baseline.
It really is a massive paradigm shift. We have to stop asking the wrong questions.
Yeah.
The source material leaves us with this incredible instruction. It says, do not ask, how can I accomplish more today? We have to completely banish that metric.
Throw it out.
Instead, ask, how can I become the kind of person who consistently creates meaningful results? Because lasting success isn't built through these rare, cinematic, extraordinary moments of inspiration. It's built through ordinary, sometimes really boring mornings, repeated with extraordinary consistency.
It is the quiet, unseen architecture of a successful life. Every single habit shapes the identity, and every intentional block of focus strengthens the cognitive resilience.
Absolutely. And to wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. Something that builds on everything we've explored today. If, as we've learned from all these sources, every morning is a vote for the person I'm becoming, what happens if we shift our perspective on our evenings?
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Right. What if we view our evenings not just as the exhausted, burnt-out end of the day where we just collapse in front of a screen, but as the quiet campaign strategy for tomorrow's election? How would you prepare tonight to ensure you cast the exact right vote tomorrow morning?
That's a great question to leave on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.
So imagine you're acing every advanced grammar test thrown your way, right? You read complex novels in a foreign language. You build this flawless vocabulary over like 10 years of dedicated study, and your teachers are just constantly praising your perfect syntax.
Yeah, you feel like you've really conquered it. You're on top of the world.
Exactly. But then you travel abroad, and you just freeze completely when a barista asks you a seemingly simple, fast-paced question at a crowded coffee shop. I mean, you know the words, but your brain just hears this absolute wall of noise.
Oh, it is a uniquely crushing feeling for advanced learners, honestly. I mean, you do everything right according to the textbook, but then you step into the real world and discover that, well, the real world doesn't really care about the textbook at all.
Right. And today, we are looking at that specific crushing defeat. We're doing a deep dive into why advanced language learners, and we're talking like C1 and C2 level English learners here, struggle so profoundly to understand fast, real-life conversations.
It's a huge issue. And really, the mission of today's deep dive is to figure out where that gap comes from. You know, why does high-level academic fluency just suddenly evaporate when you step into a crowded room?
To explore this, we're going to look at the story of Lena. She's a 34-year-old architect, and her experience it perfectly illustrates this frustrating gap between having, book smarts and actual natural conversational fluency.
Yeah, and we need to establish right up front that Lena's problem is absolutely not a lack of knowledge. I mean, her credentials on paper are flawless. She performs incredibly well on rigorous grammar tests.
Oh, totally.
She excels at reading comprehension. And if you put her in a highly structured conversation like a formal classroom setting or a very, predictable exchange, she is brilliant.
Okay, let's unpack this, because her profession as an architect is actually the perfect way to visualize what is happening to her brain here. Lena's situation with English is exactly it's like perfectly memorizing the blueprints of a massive, complex house.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because she studied so hard, she knows where every load-bearing wall is, and that represents the grammar. She knows the dimensions of every single window and door, which is her vocabulary.
So on paper, she completely owns that house.
Exactly. But having the blueprint gives you absolutely no idea how to actually navigate the building once a family moves in. Like, they start throwing their laundry on the floor, rearranging the furniture, letting the dog run through the hallways, and just generally messing up the rooms.
Yeah, because the blueprint is static. It's pristine. But a spontaneous conversation is a lived-in, messy reality. And because of this massive disconnect between the static blueprint and the messy reality, Lena finds herself agonizing over 3 distinct questions.
And these are questions I think anyone learning a language has asked themselves at some point.
Oh, absolutely. The first question she asks is, why can I understand English subtitles but not real conversations?
The subtitle paradox. It feels like you're consuming the exact same media, but your brain is doing entirely different work.
Exactly. And the second question follows right on its heels. Why do native speakers seem to speak so incredibly quickly? And finally, the third one. Why do I know so many words, but I still miss the meaning of the whole sentence?
It's so frustrating.
It is. And these questions highlight a fundamental disconnect between visual language processing and auditory reality. See, when you read subtitles, your brain relies on visual processing. It's spatial. You can physically see the spaces between the words on the screen.
Right, your eyes can instantly identify the beginning and the end of a thought.
Yes.
And even if the dialogue feels really fast, you're still somewhat in control of the pace of comprehension. Because, your eyes can dart back and reread the first half of the sentence before the subtitle actually vanishes. The words are anchored in physical space.
But auditory processing, like actually listening to a real conversation, is temporal. It exists in time, and then it is immediately gone. Poof. There are no visual spaces between the words hitting your eardrum. It's just a continuous stream of sound waves. So when Lena asks why she knows the words but misses the meaning, it's because her brain has spent years being trained to recognize the visual blueprint of the word.
Yeah.
It really hasn't been trained to recognize the messy, fast-paced acoustic signature of that word as it just flies by in real time.
So it's like she has the vocabulary, but it's stored in the totally wrong filing cabinet. She is frantically looking in the visual cabinet while the world is throwing these fast-decaying audio files at her head.
That's exactly it. And this internal friction eventually collides with a real-world catalyst that forces Lena to confront the issue head-on. So she travels for work to attend this big international conference.
Okay.
She's surrounded by English speakers from all these different countries. And it's during the coffee breaks when people are just mingling and talking naturally that she gets a really harsh reality check. She realizes she's only catching, fragmented syllables and disjointed phrases.
Okay, wait. Let me push back on this for a second. If she's a 34-year-old professional architect at a highly technical international conference, shouldn't the heavy, specialized jargon on the main stage be, way harder to understand than casual chat by the espresso machine?
I don't think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, she's sitting through complex presentations about structural engineering all day. Why is a simple coffee break the thing that trips her up?
Well, what's fascinating here is the acoustics and the structure of a main stage presentation. I mean, it is the ultimate controlled environment. The speaker is standing at a podium using a microphone that isolates their voice from all the background noise.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. And they're speaking clearly, deliberately, projecting their voice toward a completely quiet audience. They're also usually following a visual aid, like a slideshow, which gives the listener's brain an anchor.
Plus, the vocabulary is probably incredibly predictable.
Exactly. If you're at an architecture conference, your brain has already primed itself to hear words like cantilever, foundation, and load-bearing.
So the presenter is basically just reading the blueprint out loud.
Yes. But the coffee break? The coffee break is pure, unstructured chaos. You have a huge cognitive load combined with a genuinely terrible acoustic environment. I mean, people are speaking over each other.
Oh yeah, the room is echoing with clinking cups and overlapping frequencies.
And the topics shift so rapidly and unpredictably. Like 1 minute you're talking about beam stress, and the next minute someone is making a sarcastic joke about a delayed flight or a local restaurant or some random pop culture reference.
With no script, no slides, and no microphone.
None of it.
So the coffee break really is the messy house with the family running through it.
It is. And it's in this chaotic environment that Lena makes a really crucial realization. Because, she could easily shut down and internalize the failure. She could just think, oh, I guess I just isn't smart enough, or I haven't studied hard enough.
Which is what a lot of people do.
They do.
Yeah.
But she recognizes that her failure in these moments is completely disconnected from her intelligence or her effort.
And I think for anyone listening right now who has felt this exact same panic in a meeting or at a social event, that is the most vital takeaway. It's not that you didn't study the flashcards enough. Your intelligence is not the variable here.
The variable is just a lack of exposure to the unstructured reality of the spoken language. And because Lena realizes it isn't an intelligence issue, the discouragement she feels at that coffee break transforms into this fierce curiosity. She starts acting like an architect again.
Oh, I love that. She wants to analyze the physical structure of the problem.
Exactly. She asks a mechanical question. What exactly happens when people speak naturally?
So she basically goes looking for the structural flaws in the language itself. And she observes 4 very specific phenomena happening out there in the wild. First, people speak quickly. Second, words seem to disappear entirely. Third, sounds connect together. And fourth, Idioms appear unexpectedly.
Let's look at the actual biomechanics and the psychology of those 4 points, starting with speed. Because when Lena says native speakers talk too fast, she's actually identifying a processing bottleneck. Well, fast is relative. To a native speaker, the pace feels totally normal because their brain chunks sounds together automatically. But for a learner, the brain is trying to parse every single phonetic input individually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so by the time Lena's brain has decoded the first 3 words of a sentence, the speaker is already on, like word 10. Her working memory just overloads and dumps the information.
That completely explains that feeling of being overwhelmed. But the next 2 phenomena, words disappearing and sounds connecting, are where the actual physics of speech come into play. It makes me think of learning to play music.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Like when you're a beginner, you learn words like individual notes on a piano. You press a C, you lift your finger. You press an E, you lift your finger. Press a G, they're distinct, separate, clear.
Right, which is exactly how a textbook teaches language. Every word is an isolated event.
Exactly. But when native speakers are in a spontaneous conversation, they aren't playing individual notes anymore. They're pressing all the keys down at once to play a musical chord. They're blurring those distinct notes together into a single, continuous sound wave.
That is a brilliant analogy.
And if your textbook only ever taught you to listen for the individual notes, your brain simply cannot process the chord.
No, it can't.
Yeah.
And the concept of the musical chord directly translates to the second phenomenon she noticed, words disappearing.
Yeah.
In linguistics, this often involves a process called elision.
The elision.
Yeah, elision is basically the omission of a sound or a syllable when speaking. And native speakers don't do this to be difficult. They do it because of the biomechanics of the mouth and the natural rhythm of the language. Because, you see, English is what linguists call a stress-timed language.
Oh, I've heard of this, which
Yeah.
means the rhythm of the sentence is dictated by the stressed, important words, and everything else just gets kind of squished together to fit the beat.
Exactly. The space between the stressed words has to remain roughly the same, no matter how many unstressed words are jammed in between them. So to maintain that rhythm, native speakers literally swallow syllables and drop consonants. They're optimizing for breath and speed.
So the function words like to, for, at, and, those are the first casualties.
Always. Going to becomes gonna, want to becomes wanna, but it happens on a micro level too. Take the word comfortable. Technically, it's 4 syllables, right?
Yeah.
Comfortable.
Right.
But a native speaker drops an entire syllable and just smashes the consonants together, saying,
Comfortable.
yeah, definitely say it like that. So when you, as a listener, feel like words are disappearing in a fast conversation, you aren't crazy. They literally are not there in the acoustic signal.
They are physically absent.
You're straining your ears trying to hear a sound that the speaker never actually produced.
Exactly. And this economy of effort blends directly into the third phenomenon Lena noticed, sounds connecting together. This encompasses linguistic concepts like assimilation and catenation.
Okay, lay those out for me.
Sure. So catenation is when the consonant at the end of one word attaches to the vowel at the beginning of the next word. Like if a speaker says an apple, the N sound moves over. Acoustically, they're actually saying maple.
Oh, maple, right.
But assimilation is even trickier. It happens when one sound changes to become more like a neighboring sound, simply because it's physically easier for the tongue and the jaw to execute.
So the vocal tract is just constantly looking for shortcuts.
Always. A classic example is when a word ends in a T or D sound, and the next word begins with a Y sound. Think of the phrase, did you? The jaw has to do a lot of work to articulate the D and then reset for the Y. So the vocal tract takes a shortcut and blends them into a J sound. Did you becomes didja, don't you becomes docha. Or take a phrase like, stop it. The native speaker just smashes them together into stop it.
Wow. And to a native speaker, sliding the sounds together like that feels completely natural. It literally requires less muscular effort. But to Lena, who is visually searching her mental dictionary for a word spelled D-I-D-J-A or S-T-O-P-P-I-T, it is completely baffling. She can't find the word because it's not on the blueprint.
It isn't. And if we categorize these challenges, those first 3 phenomena, the perceived speed, the disappearing words via elision, and the connecting sounds via assimilation, those represent the physical hurdles of natural speech. It's really about the actual biomechanics of the mouth, the physics of sound waves, and how the brain processes rapid auditory input.
Right. But then we hit the fourth phenomenon she noticed, idioms appearing unexpectedly. If the first three are physical hurdles, this one is the cultural hurdle.
Completely. Because an idiom is a phrase where the meaning cannot be logically deduced from the individual words themselves. It requires cultural context.
Yeah.
So imagine Lena standing at that coffee break, finally managing to parse the physical sound wave of a sentence. Someone says to her, "We need to touch base later." Now she successfully identifies the words. She knows the definition of touch. She knows the definition of base.
But functionally, that sentence is a locked door for her. The cultural meaning of touch base, meaning, to briefly make contact or update someone, is completely hidden from the literal definitions.
Exactly. So she is fighting this brutal two-front war. Her ears and her working memory are struggling with the physics of connected speech, trying to untangle those musical chords you mentioned.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, her cognitive processing is struggling with the cultural shorthand of idioms. It just leads to massive cognitive overload.
It makes complete sense why the casual coffee break was so exhausting compared to the heavy technical presentation. In an architecture presentation, a beam is a beam. A foundation is a foundation. The vocabulary maps perfectly to the literal meaning.
Exactly.
But at the coffee break, someone is throwing you a curveball while simultaneously, swallowing half their syllables.
That's a perfect summary. And identifying the exact mechanics of this problem is the crucial turning point in the source material. By pinpointing these four phenomena, the speed, elision, connected speech, and idioms, Lena finally defines the parameters of her problem.
Which is huge.
It is. And this realization drives her to a bookstore, searching for a methodology that addresses the reality of sound, rather than just the theory of grammar. And she ends up discovering a book called Fluent Forever.
So she pivots from feeling like this passive victim of fast English to actually becoming an active problem solver. Because once you understand the actual biomechanics of why the language sounds the way it does, you can change how you train your brain.
Defining the problem is half the battle. Recognizing that natural English relies on these messy, connected sounds means she can just stop trying to force the chaotic reality of the language to match her pristine grammar textbook.
Right.
She stops relying entirely on visual reading and starts really training her auditory processing. She basically starts listening for the musical chords instead of waiting for the isolated piano notes.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Whether you're studying a foreign language yourself or trying to follow an intense, fast-paced meeting, or just navigating an unfamiliar professional environment where people use heavy jargon and cultural shorthand. If you suddenly feel completely lost, remember Lena the architect.
Yeah, remember that hitting a wall in a spontaneous, unstructured environment is not a reflection of your underlying intelligence.
You built the house perfectly on paper. You have the blueprint. The barrier you are experiencing is simply a lack of exposure to the messy, chaotic reality of how people actually communicate when they let their guard down, prioritize speed over clarity, and rely on cultural context.
Because fluency is not about maintaining the pristine laboratory.
Right. Fluency is learning to navigate the rooms after the furniture has been rearranged and the dog is running through the house.
I love that. And, if we synthesize everything we've looked at today, from the cognitive load of auditory processing to the physical shortcuts of the vocal tract, it really leaves us with a profound implication about how language is taught and evaluated in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. If standard academic tests are measuring an isolated, visually anchored, perfectly articulated version of a language.
It really begs the question, doesn't it? If natural, fluent speech relies so heavily on words physically disappearing, sounds melting together into unrecognizable chunks, and idioms that totally defy literal translation, then maybe the rigid, proper grammar we relentlessly test learners on isn't actually the real language at all.
Wow.
Are we spending years evaluating people like Lena on a sterilized, artificial version of the language that absolutely no native speaker actually uses in their daily life?
If the blueprint doesn't match the house anyone actually lives in, maybe it's time we start drawing new blueprints. So what if that overwhelming urge you get, to just quit your job or maybe abandon some massive project or, I don't know, throw your study materials right out the nearest window? What if that isn't actually a sign of weakness?
Oh, that's a wild thought.
Right. Like, what if it's actually an acute neurological freeze response? Because, we are constantly fed this narrative that to succeed at anything, you have to just operate like a machine.
Oh, yeah, totally. The whole grind culture thing.
Exactly. The culture insists you just push through the pain, ignore the exhaustion, and basically never, ever power down. So today we are dismantling that toxic hustle culture. We're doing a deep dive into a really insightful source today, a transcript from the Daily English podcast hosted by Corey and Oris.
And it's a great one.
It really is. And on paper, they're talking to English language learners in an episode they called Don't Give Up on Yourself. But honestly, looking at the mechanics of what they teach here, this is a total masterclass for you, the listener, or anyone trying to master a complex skill or, just trying to survive an incredibly heavy week. So, okay, let's unpack this because the distinction they make between toxic grinding and actual perseverance is huge.
Yeah, well, what's fascinating here is that the mechanics of learning a language, they completely mirror the mechanics of tackling any long-term goal. I mean, the psychological hurdles are virtually identical across the board.
Which makes sense. The brain is the brain, right?
Right, exactly. And the source immediately tackles this critical distinction between our sort of societal ideal of never giving up and the reality of genuine perseverance.
Yeah, they paint a pretty harsh picture of that toxic version.
They do. Because the toxic version of never give up, it treats the human mind as if it just has, infinite resources. It demands that you never rest, never cry, and just completely ignore your physical limits.
Which is impossible.
Literally impossible. But perseverance, as they define it, is entirely different. I mean, they use this beautiful visual of resilience being like a tree in a strong wind. It bends so it doesn't break.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with speed or this unbroken intensity. It simply means remaining on the path for a long time, even if your forward motion slows to an absolute crawl.
Which is such a relief to hear, honestly. And they illustrate this with a hypothetical student, right? Sophia.
Yes, Sophia. So relatable.
Yeah, so Sophia works this demanding job all day, comes home entirely depleted, but she still wants to study. So she sits down, she opens her textbook, looks at the page, and then just immediately closes it.
We all know that feeling.
Right. But society looks at Sophia and immediately labels her as lazy or unmotivated or just lacking grit. But the source makes this point that reframes everything. Sophia isn't lazy. Her physical and cognitive resources are just entirely spent.
Yeah, we constantly, and I mean constantly, conflate physical and mental exhaustion with some sort of moral failing.
Oh, absolutely.
When we hit a wall, we just assume a lack of willpower. But let's look at what is actually happening in the brain. Sophia is facing what the source calls an uphill battle.
Like walking up a really steep hill with a super heavy bag.
Exactly. And that heavy bag is filled with the compounding weight of obstacles and setbacks. And they distinguish between the two. So obstacles are just the daily friction of life.
Like limited time, financial stress, having to feed your kids.
Right. And then setbacks are those moments where you take one step forward and get pushed 2 steps back. Like, say you sacrifice your entire weekend to study for a certification, and then you still fail the exam.
Ouch. Yeah.
So when you combine that daily grinding friction with sudden setbacks, the brain perceives a massive unmanageable threat to its energy reserves. You basically lose heart.
Are we basically treating the learning process like it's a sprint when it's actually a marathon? I mean, we feel guilty for taking a water break, but if you don't take the water break, you literally never finish the race.
That is spot on.
It makes me think of how we treat our tech versus how we treat ourselves. Like if you take your smartphone out in freezing weather and it's trying to run a massive software update on like a 1% battery, it's going to shut down.
Oh, instantly.
Right. And the phone isn't broken, and it definitely isn't lazy. It is just executing a hardwired survival protocol so it doesn't damage the internal hardware. We accept that our devices have battery limits, but then we expect our own brains to run these high-level cognitive updates while running on completely empty.
And that smartphone analogy, it explains the physiological reality of burnout perfectly. I mean, the brain is a really energy-intensive organ.
Yeah.
When you're carrying the heavy baggage of those obstacles and setbacks we talked about, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical decision-making center, it is burning through metabolic resources at just an incredible rate.
So it's basically draining the battery.
Exactly. And when those resources hit a critical low, the brain initiates a freeze response to conserve energy. So that urge to quit, that feeling of just being completely done, it's a protective mechanism. It's not a character flaw.
Okay, so if the desire to quit is just this biological freeze response to save energy, how are we supposed to actually keep moving forward without permanently damaging the system?
Yeah.
Because we can't just tell our brains to ignore the low battery warning.
No, you definitely don't ignore the warning. You change the demands on the system. You make the mountain smaller.
Oh, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, so the source uses this amazing analogy of a messy room.
Uh,
If you stand in the doorway of a room where every single surface is covered in clutter, and you tell yourself, I have to clean this entire thing right now, what happens?
You want to just lie down on the floor and take a nap.
Right. Because your prefrontal cortex is immediately overwhelmed by the sheer volume of micro decisions. Like, where do I start? Where does this go? The cognitive load is just way too high, which triggers that freeze response we were talking about.
But if you look at that exact same chaotic room and just tell yourself, you know what, I am only going to organize this one single shelf, the perceived threat just vanishes.
Exactly. The cognitive load drops to a completely manageable level.
Because the brain registers that one specific isolated task as highly survivable.
Yes.
The hosts actually shared this story about a student who described learning a new language as standing at the edge of this giant, terrifying ocean. And she was so intimidated by the sheer volume of what she didn't know that she refused to even touch the water.
Which is such a natural response.
Right. And the advice she received was incredibly practical. They told her, you don't need to swim the ocean today. Just put your feet in.
Just the feet.
Yeah. And for her, putting her feet in literally meant just listening to a 3-minute audio clip while making a cup of tea. That was the entire commitment.
And it works because lowering that barrier to entry entirely bypasses the brain's alarm system.
Mm-hmm.
The source actually highlights this with a story about one of the hosts, Corey.
Oh, right, the meltdown story.
Yeah, Corey hit absolute rock bottom. He was trying to watch this educational video that was supposed to be easy, but he said it sounded like complete space language, just pure, unintelligible noise.
Which is so frustrating.
And on that exact same day, he received a terrible test score. So that is a massive collision of an obstacle and a setback all at once.
The battery is at 0.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Corey's instinct was to just abandon the goal entirely. But instead of officially quitting, he took a tactical retreat. He stepped away for 2 full days, just rested, watched silly videos, and allowed the frustration to process.
Which takes self-awareness.
It does. And when Corey returned, the strategy completely shifted to just 10 minutes a day. That's it. Listening to one short audio clip and sometimes repeating that exact same flip 3 times.
Okay, I have to challenge this 10-minute rule, though, because I hear this advice everywhere, but I'm looking at the scale of massive goals. Like, if you want to actually become fluent in a language or pivot your career into some highly technical field, is 5 to 10 minutes a day actually enough to master something that complex?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right, because part of me wonders, is this just a psychological trick? Like a pacifier we give ourselves so we don't have to admit we basically quit. Because 10 minutes of studying astrophysics is not going to get you a job at NASA.
Okay, it's a vital question. Because, no, 10 minutes alone will not turn you into an expert. However, it is far more than just a psychological trick. It is a neurological necessity during periods of high friction.
What do you mean?
Well, when you are in a state of exhaustion, the goal is no longer the rapid acquisition of new knowledge. The goal shifts to maintaining the neural pathways you've already built and preserving your identity as a learner.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because think about it, when you quit a pursuit entirely for a month because you burned out trying to study for 3 hours a day, the synaptic connections you built actually begin to prune.
Oh, wow. You literally lose the wiring.
Yes. And more importantly, the psychological friction required to restart after a long absence is just massive. But by committing to just 10 minutes a day, you keep that pathway active. You are continuing to lay down myelin on those specific neural circuits.
You're keeping the lights on.
Exactly. And you're also building a crucial track record of consistency and self-trust. You're proving to yourself that you can show up. And once that period of burnout passes and your energy reserves replenishes, you already have the daily habit built, which makes scaling back up to an hour or more feel completely effortless. Consistency over perfection, right?
So you're basically keeping the engine idling so it doesn't freeze over in the middle of winter. You aren't trying to win a race today. You just don't want the car to die.
That's a great way to look at it.
But, I mean, shrinking the external workload down to 10 minutes feels like it only addresses the physical schedule. You can idle the engine all you want, but if you have a driver inside the car who is constantly smashing the dashboard and screaming that the trip is a total disaster, you are still going to crash.
Oh, absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source material addresses this directly by examining the inside battle.
The mindset stuff.
Yeah, because lowering the external cognitive load is completely useless if you just replace it with a massive internal cognitive load. The internal monologue, the story you constantly tell yourself, can actually generate more friction than any external setback.
Yeah, they had that great analogy about the movie soundtrack.
Yes. They compare negative self-talk to watching a movie with a highly depressing soundtrack playing in the background. You could be watching this beautifully shot, happy scene, but if the background music is tense and mournful, the entire experience just feels heavy and ominous.
It ruins the whole scene. If you are constantly looping thoughts like, I'm behind, or I'm not smart enough for this, or I'm failing, it colors every single interaction you have with your goal.
It really does.
Even when you make a breakthrough or you finally grasp a difficult concept, the victory feels totally hollow because that miserable soundtrack is still playing in your head.
And we really have to look at how the brain processes that negative soundtrack. When you harshly criticize yourself, your brain actually doesn't distinguish between an external attacker and an internal one.
Wait, really? It treats them the same?
It does. It perceives a legitimate threat. So it activates the sympathetic nervous system and pumps stress hormones like cortisol straight into your bloodstream. So think about what's happening. Your brain is simultaneously trying to dedicate processing power to learning a complex new skill while also diverting heavy resources to defend against the emotional attack you are launching on yourself.
That is wildly inefficient.
It is the definition of inefficient, which is why the source suggests these practical mechanical reframes to stop the drain. So instead of categorizing yourself by saying, I'm stupid after a failure, you categorize the event itself by saying, this is a setback.
Right. Or changing, I'm terrible at this to, I'm nervous, but I am learning. It's like, I always look at this internal dynamic, like dealing with a horrific sports coach.
Oh, I like that.
Because imagine if you joined a new team and on the very first day, a real-life coach followed you around the field screaming the exact phrases you say to yourself in your head.
Oh my gosh, it would be awful.
Right. Telling you that you are hopelessly behind, that everyone else is faster, that you should probably just go home. You would walk off the field and quit immediately. And no one would blame you. Yet we allow our internal coach to berate us all day, every day, and we somehow wonder why we feel exhausted. We have to become our own encouraging coach. We have to fire the toxic one.
We really do. But, the environment outside your head matters just as much as the one inside. The source brings up this vital principle. Do not fight alone.
Yes, curating that external circle.
They recount this story of a listener who left a comment expressing just deep, deep frustration. She genuinely believed she was the absolute only person in her entire city struggling to grasp the material, and that isolation just amplified her despair.
But then people responded, right?
Yeah. Right beneath her comment, hundreds of other learners replied saying, me too. And suddenly, her struggle wasn't this personal defect anymore. It was a shared, completely normalized part of the process.
And that shared community also provides perspective when you kind of lose your own. One of the hosts showed a story about hitting a wall and texting a friend that they were ready to give up. And the friend texted back 5 words that honestly should be printed on billboards. They said, "You are tired, not useless."
Tired, not useless. It's so powerful.
Think about how often high achievers blend those two concepts together.
All the time.
Yeah.
High achievers frequently anchor their entire sense of identity and self-worth to their current level of output. So when their physiological energy drops, their output drops. And because they view their value entirely through the lens of productivity, a temporary lack of energy is immediately interpreted as a permanent lack of value.
Which is so dangerous.
Very. But that phrase, tired, not useless, it severs that connection entirely. It correctly identifies the problem as a temporary deficit in metabolic energy, which, by the way, can easily be solved with rest, rather than a permanent defect in character, which can't be solved at all.
And the source also touches on the concept of influence, right? Like actively avoiding people who bring you down.
Yeah. The energy vampire.
Exactly. Like the study partner who only ever points out your errors and makes you feel smaller.
Yeah.
They say you have to treasure and pull closer to the people who lift you up. But okay, let's play this out for a second. Let's say I have done it all. I have shrunk my massive goal down to a manageable 10 minutes a day. I have successfully fired my toxic internal coach. I've surrounded myself with a community that reminds me I am tired, not useless.
You're doing great.
Right. I've done all the right things. But what happens if I sit down, I look at the project, and it is still completely unworkable? Like I'm still just hitting a brick wall. Is there ever a point where throwing in the towel actually is the most logical answer?
Well, this raises an important question about how rigid we are with our goals, because we often assume that if a specific plan fails, the entire overarching dream is invalid. But the source introduces this deeply liberating concept. You can change the plan without changing the dream.
Okay, I love that. They use a highly functional analogy. Imagine you set out on this really long walk to a specific destination. And halfway there, the shoes you're wearing start causing severe blisters. You're in immense pain. Your response to that pain isn't to sit down on the side of the road and declare, I am a failure and I will never walk again.
Right. You'd just be like, these shoes are awful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You simply acknowledge that the shoes are the wrong tool for the job and you change your footwear. Changing your method is not a failure.
But we hold on to bad plans like a badge of honor sometimes.
We really do.
Like if your original strategy was to read a dense, dry grammar book for 3 hours every evening and you find yourself absolutely dreading the end of the day, the dream wasn't the problem, and your intellect isn't the problem either. The problem is the textbook.
Yes.
The source phrased it hilariously, actually. They said that sometimes your body is at the table, but your soul is at the beach.
That is so true.
If your soul has abandoned the mission, you are wearing the wrong shoes.
Yeah.
You have to pivot. Listen to podcasts, watch a documentary, find a tutor.
And yet we fall into the sunk cost fallacy so often. We invest so much time into a specific method that we feel compelled to stick with it, even when it is actively harming our progress. True discipline is so often misunderstood as this rigid, unyielding adherence to a miserable plan. But psychological flexibility, the ability to objectively assess that a tool is failing and pivot to a new one without ego, that is the actual hallmark of resilience. It's wisdom, not weakness.
So what does this all mean for the day-to-day? We have these new flexible tools. We are moving forward, but the steps are agonizingly small because we've shrunk the mountain down to 10 minutes a day. How do we actually stay motivated when the massive milestones like getting a promotion or finally passing the board exams are still months or years away?
Well, the source offers a daily practice they call the 10-second pat on the back. You have to intentionally track and celebrate the micro wins.
Why 10 seconds?
It is deeply rooted in how the brain's reward circuitry functions. If you only ever celebrate the massive milestones, you are basically starving your brain of dopamine for months at a time. And dopamine isn't just a chemical that makes you feel happy. It is the brain's primary mechanism for reinforcing behavior.
Oh, so it's a training tool.
Exactly. When you acknowledge a small win like successfully understanding a joke in another language or ordering a coffee in your head or maintaining your composure during a stressful meeting, and you intentionally let yourself feel proud for just 10 seconds, you trigger a dopamine release.
And what does that do?
The dopamine acts as a neurological save button. It tells your brain, hey, whatever behavior we just did, remember it and wire the brain to do it again. The hosts of the source material actually keep a running small wins list on their phones just to consciously trigger this reinforcement loop.
Now, I have to bring up a famous phrase the source mentioned because it perfectly encapsulates this entire deep dive. We all know the old cliche, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. It is the ultimate hustle culture battle cry. But the host offered an incredibly honest and frankly better revision. They said, when the going gets tough, I get snacks.
Best revision ever.
I relate to that on a spiritual level.
Well, and it works. Grabbing a snack, taking a walk, or stepping away to just breathe are highly effective ways to regulate a spiked nervous system. You are physically stepping out of the fight or flight response.
But you don't just eat the snack and quit for the day.
No. The critical nuance the source adds is that, yes, you take the break, you get the snack, but you follow it up with just your required 10 minutes of focus afterward. You soothe the nervous system without abandoning the overarching mission.
You bend so you don't break. So to bring all of this together for you, if you are staring at a massive undertaking today and you feel that heavy, paralyzing urge to just walk away from it all, recognize what is actually happening. You are allowed to power down and rest. You are absolutely allowed to change your direction and find a pair of shoes that actually fit. But you do not have to throw your ultimate dream in the trash just because the friction today was high. Take their advice. Notice one small win today, write it down, and just allow yourself to feel genuinely proud of it for exactly 10 seconds.
And I want to leave you with one final thought regarding that intense, overwhelming friction you feel right before you want to quit. We universally interpret the frustration of staring at a problem we can't solve as a signal that we're failing. But let's look at the biology for a second. What if that precise feeling of intense mental strain, the sheer frustration that makes you want to close the book or slam the laptop shut, what if that isn't a sign of failure at all? What if it is the literal biological sensation of your brain actively rewiring itself to accommodate a new skill? What if that intense desire to quit is the exact moment the upgrade is taking place?
Wow. If the frustration is literally just the feeling of the upgrade installing, you definitely don't want to rip the power cord out of the wall before it finishes. So the next time your brain drafts a resignation letter, force it to take a water break, give it a snack, and stick around for the upgrade to complete. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time. Imagine you are sitting in a really high-stakes meeting.
Oh, yeah. Or like the absolute final round of a major job interview.
Right, exactly. And you've just spent the last 10 minutes flawlessly breaking down this highly complex problem.
Just completely crushing it.
Yeah. Let's say you're dissecting, emerging tech or shifting market trends. You're articulate, you're confident, you are just completely in your element. And then the interviewer leans back, gives you a little smile, and asks this seemingly simple question. They say, so how would you describe your personality? Like, what actually motivates you?
And suddenly, all that eloquence just completely
It's
evaporates.
just gone. You completely freeze. You go from delivering this absolute masterclass in market analysis to, well, stumbling over basic adjectives.
You sound like you've never actually met yourself before.
Exactly. It's so awkward. And the question is, why does this happen? So today, we're looking at the research of an organizational psychologist named Sophia.
She's the one who figured out exactly why our brains basically betray us in these moments.
Right, and more importantly, how to actually fix it. So, okay, let's unpack this, because this deep dive is really for you.
Yeah. Whether you are actively preparing for a big career move, or maybe you're stepping up to lead a new team.
Or even if you're just, simply trying to map out your own communication style, the mechanics hidden in Sophia's story here are universally applicable.
They really are. And Sophia's perspective is particularly revealing, I think, because she works as a leadership coach for these massive international companies.
Right.
So she spends every single day analyzing how high-level professionals handle things like teamwork, emotional intelligence, and, just general communication.
She gets a front row seat to all of it.
Exactly. And she started noticing this really pervasive pattern among advanced English speakers. They could handle incredibly dense topics. I'm talking corporate strategy, macroeconomic shifts, tech innovations, just with total ease.
Smooth sailing.
Right.
Yep, yeah.
But the moment the conversation required them to answer personal questions like, how do you handle conflict? Or how has your personality changed over time? Boom. Yeah, they just hit an absolute brick wall.
It's crazy. I look at this fluency paradox. It's kind of like a massive imbalance in a computer system.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, having an incredibly advanced professional vocabulary, but zero self-awareness, it's like having a top-of-the-line 8K graphics card, but you're running it on a completely corrupted, outdated operating system.
Oh, man. Yeah. That is a perfect analogy.
Like, the external display looks phenomenal when it's running the standard pre-programmed corporate software.
Right, the stuff you do every day.
Exactly. But the very moment you ask the system to run a diagnostic on itself to look inward, the whole machine just crashes because that foundational architecture just isn't there to process the command.
What's fascinating here is how our professional culture actively encourages that exact imbalance.
Oh, completely.
We are heavily incentivized to upgrade the graphics card, to use your analogy, while just completely ignoring the operating system.
We spend, decades mastering the external language of our industries?
Yeah, because that is what gets measured and rewarded.
Exactly.
And the source material actually shares this incredibly tense, almost cinematic moment where Sophia is attending a global leadership conference.
Oh, this part was wild.
Right. So the keynote speaker is up on stage, looks out at this massive audience of highly successful executives and asks them one single question. He says, "Do you know who you are when no one is watching?"
And the room just falls completely silent.
Complete silence. I mean, these are executives who have spent years, decades even, developing strategic thinking and hard skills.
But they haven't spent any meaningful time analyzing their own natural or experience-shaped personalities.
Exactly. They have literally never audited their own underlying software.
And that silence deeply unsettles Sophia. I mean, you can feel it in the text. It forces her to start reflecting on her own life, asking herself, how much of her personality is hardwired, how much has been shaped by her environment.
And can her identity actually continue to evolve in adulthood?
Right. And to understand that, she realizes she can't just learn new vocabulary words. Like, flashcards aren't going to cut it here. She needs to understand the psychological machinery of the human mind.
So she goes straight to the behavioral science. She dives into two monumental frameworks, which I love. The first is emotional intelligence.
by Daniel Goleman.
A classic.
Yeah, and she pairs that with the behavioral economics and cognitive psychology of thinking fast and slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Which is such a heavy-hitting combo.
It really is.
Yeah.
And when you synthesize the mechanics of these two works in the context of professional communication, you start to see exactly why that boardroom of executives fell silent.
Okay, let's break down those mechanics. Because, I mean, understanding that emotional intelligence is important is one thing, right? We all know we should have it. But understanding how our brains are actually processing these interactions in real time, that's the real key.
Right. So from Goleman's research, Sophia targets the biological reality of how we process stress. Goleman writes extensively about the amygdala, which, for those who don't know, is the brain's primitive threat detection center.
Like the lizard brain.
Exactly, the lizard brain. Now, in a corporate environment, when someone challenges your idea in a meeting, your brain doesn't necessarily distinguish between a threat to your ego and like a physical threat to your life.
Wait, really? It treats a snarky comment the same as a tiger jumping out at you?
Basically, yeah. The amygdala can essentially hijack your neural circuitry. It floods your system with stress hormones before your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, analytical part of your brain, can even boot up.
Wow.
So Goleman's whole premise is that true success requires recognizing that biological surge, so you can respond thoughtfully rather than just reacting impulsively to a perceived threat.
Okay, that makes sense. And then Kahneman's work adds an entirely different layer to how we process that information. Right.
Yeah, Kahneman divides the mind into two distinct operating systems.
Okay, lay it on me.
So system one is fast, intuitive, and highly emotional. It operates completely automatically. Little or no effort. No sense of voluntary control.
It's just happening.
Exactly. Then you have system two. That one is slower, more deliberative, and way more logical.
The thinker.
Right. Now, system one relies on heuristics, which are basically mental shortcuts, to make lightning-fast judgments about the world just to save cognitive energy.
Because if we had to logically process every single thing, our brains would explode.
Exactly. But here's the catch. Those unconscious, instantaneous emotional judgments heavily dictate how we communicate, how we assess our colleagues, and how we make decisions in the workplace.
Even when we think we're being super rational.
Oh, especially then. We think we're being completely rational, but most of the time, our slow system 2 is just rationalizing the snap emotional judgment that our fast system 1 already made milliseconds earlier.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit, just for the sake of anyone who has ever been in a really tense, high-pressure environment.
Sure, go for it.
If system 1 is an evolutionary feature, right, and these emotional judgments are fundamentally unconscious and happening at lightning speed, how can we possibly catch ourselves? Like, if the amygdala is hijacking the system before the analytical brain is even fully online, aren't we just essentially doomed to snap at our colleagues or make defensive decisions?
That is the pivotal hurdle Sophia had to overcome in her own research.
Okay.
The biological response is fast, yes, but it is not entirely inescapable if you change your baseline level of awareness.
How so?
Well, Sophia doesn't just read these theories and nod along. She implements an active daily audit of her emotional patterns. Kahneman and Goleman both point to this idea of bringing the unconscious into the conscious through deliberate attention.
Okay, so paying attention to the autopilot.
Exactly. Sophia starts paying hyper-focused attention to her bodily sensations, like her immediate emotional flares throughout the day. When a client pushes back or a deadline suddenly shifts, she practices noticing the physical tightening in her chest, or, that sudden urge to interrupt someone.
Yep. Oh, that urge is so hard to fight.
It is. But by deliberately labeling those feelings in real time, you essentially recruit the prefrontal cortex to supervise the amygdala.
Oh, I love that. It's kind of like installing a delay pedal on an electric guitar.
Oh, say more about that.
Well, the raw signal is still being generated by the guitar, right? That's your fast emotional system 1, plucking the string.
Right, the initial reaction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead of letting that signal travel instantaneously to the amplifier where it just gets blasted out to the whole room for everyone to hear, the delay pedal captures it. It holds the signal in a buffer for just a fraction of a second.
That is a great way to visualize it.
Yeah, that tiny intentional pause gives you the space to decide if you actually want to play that note or if you need to, adjust the volume before anyone else hears it.
Yes. That mechanism, that cognitive buffer, is exactly what transforms a reaction into a response. By practicing that intentional delay, Sophia is actively regulating her internal emotional state. She isn't suppressing the emotion.
She's just managing the output.
Exactly. She is managing the output.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because once you successfully install that internal delay pedal, it fundamentally alters how you project yourself outwardly in a professional setting.
It really does.
You aren't just reacting louder or faster than everyone else anymore. And that leads to a fascinating secondary problem Sophia encounters, which brings her to study Susan Cain's work, specifically her book, Quiet.
Right, because the corporate ecosystem traditionally equates competence and confidence with volume and speed.
Oh, 100%. The loudest person in the room is the boss.
Right. The person who speaks first, the person who dominates the airtime, and the person who makes the fastest decisions is typically perceived as the natural leader. But Susan Cain's research completely dismantles that assumption. She looks at how different nervous systems actually process external stimuli.
Because it's not just a personality quirk. It is a physiological difference in how our brains actually handle information.
Exactly. The science indicates that introverts often route information through longer, more complex neural pathways that are associated with internal processing, memory, and planning.
So they're literally processing more variables before they speak.
Yes. And Cain argues that the corporate obsession with what she calls the extrovert ideal actively marginalizes these incredibly powerful forms of communication. Things like thoughtful listening, deep empathy, and careful observation.
Those are huge skills.
Huge. Confidence does not always roar. Sometimes confidence is just the silent processing of complex group dynamics.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, and I think about this quote all the time, there is this profound reflection from Sophia in the source material after she internalizes Cain's research. He says, "Perhaps the strongest communicator is not always the person who speaks the most, but the one who understands others the best."
Oh, I love that quote. That single sentence redefines the entire concept of workplace value.
It really does.
It shifts the metric of a good communicator from, who is taking up the most acoustic space in the room to who is actually synthesizing the information and building the deepest psychological safety among the team.
Absolutely. And honestly, think about your own workplace right now. Like, picture your next team meeting. Look around that virtual or physical table.
Yeah, who is taking up the airtime?
Right. Who are the loud voices who dominate the agenda just to be heard? And then contrast that. Who are the true communicators? The individuals who might speak the least, but when they finally do unmute or lean in, they completely synthesize the room's chaotic energy into a clear direction.
It is a completely different, highly refined skill set.
It really is a superpower.
But here's the thing. Once Sophia understands this underlying psychology, the internal regulation from Goleman and Kahneman, and the power of quiet observation from Cain, she still faces her original dilemma.
Oh, right. The vocabulary problem.
Exactly. How do you actually articulate this newly discovered self-awareness? You have the upgraded operating system now, going back to your analogy, but how do you program the user interface so others can actually understand it?
This is where we move from behavioral psychology into the actual mechanics of language acquisition, which is so cool.
Yeah, to practice articulating this, Sophia actually joins an international discussion group focused on psychology and human behavior.
And one evening, the moderator poses a question to the group. They ask, "How would you describe your communication style?"
And the contrast between how this group answers and how those executives in the silent room reacted earlier is staggering.
Night and day.
The answers here require immense precision and nuance. Like, one participant shares, "I tend to be analytical and reflective," and another participant says, "I'm collaborative, but I sometimes avoid difficult conversations."
Oh man, the self-awareness in that second answer is just incredible. It acknowledges a strength while simultaneously exposing a vulnerability, just out in the open. Another person replies, "I'm naturally assertive, although I've learned to become more empathetic over time."
Listening to this, Sophia realizes that discussing your inner life requires a highly specialized vocabulary. You cannot just rely on simple, flat adjectives if you want to accurately convey a dynamic, evolving personality.
You can't just say, "I'm nice."
Exactly. So she turns to a text called English Vocabulary in Use, advanced to deliberately construct a toolkit of sophisticated terms.
Let's look at the specific vocabulary she focuses on, because these terms perfectly encapsulate the psychological frameworks we were just discussing. She studies phrases like being emotionally resilient,
Intellectually curious.
psychologically flexible. I think that one is a brilliant term because it implies a sort of structural integrity like a mind that can bend and adapt to new information without just snapping under the pressure of being wrong.
That's a great way to put it. She also integrates terms like introspective, diplomatic, and emotionally regulated.
But the critical insight here isn't the list of words itself, is it?
No, not at all. It is the specific mechanism she uses to learn them. She doesn't just memorize dictionary definitions or use flashcards.
Right, because rote memorization would just be loading data into the short-term memory, which we know just evaporates the moment the amygdala detects the stress of a real-world interview.
Exactly. You'd freeze up all over again. So Sophia utilizes a technique that bridges semantic memory, which is just the dictionary definition of a word, with episodic memory.
And episodic memory is like our autobiographical record of our own lives, right?
Yes. So she writes reflective journal entries where she forces herself to describe her own real lived experiences using these exact advanced terms.
She is essentially writing the code that connects the new vocabulary directly to our personal history.
Yes. Because when you try to memorize the definition of emotionally regulated in a vacuum, it just remains this abstract concept. But if you sit down and journal about the specific incident last Tuesday when a major client threatened to pull their contract, and you felt that familiar tightening in your chest?
Oh, that feeling.
Yeah, but you intentionally engaged your cognitive delay pedal, you took a breath, and you responded calmly. And then you explicitly labeled that specific memory as being emotionally regulated. You have fundamentally changed how your brain stores that word.
It's locked in.
Exactly. The vocabulary is now anchored to an emotion and a lived event. It becomes a permanent part of your identity toolkit.
It is the difference between like reading the instruction manual for a tool and knowing exactly how the weight of that tool feels in your hand because you've actually used it to build something.
That is spot on. And this rigorous process of combining psychological theory with targeted linguistic practice entirely transforms Sophia. It's incredible. It all culminates in this high-level workshop she is invited to deliver for senior managers from across the globe.
Which is aptly titled, Leading Through Emotional Intelligence. And during this workshop, a participant raises their hand and asks a very direct, revealing question. They ask, what personality trait has contributed most to your success?
Her response here really highlights the total paradigm shift she has undergone. She tells the audience, for many years, I believed confidence meant always having the right answers. Now I believe confidence means being comfortable asking thoughtful questions.
Wow.
Yeah. She explains that effective leadership does not begin with external influence. It must always begin with internal comprehension. You cannot manage others if you cannot manage yourself.
And the executives in the room are just deeply impacted by this. In the text notes, they're discussing the concept long after the presentation concludes. It completely shatters the traditional corporate expectation of that loud, infallible leader.
It flips it on its head.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at the entirety of Sophia's journey, from that silent room to the advanced workshop, what is the ultimate lesson from this source material?
I think the clearest way to see the impact of this journey is to contrast Sophia's former self-perception with her current one.
Okay.
Years ago, if prompted to describe herself, she relied on static, fixed adjectives. She would say things like, I am hardworking, I am friendly, or I am organized.
Which is the verbal equivalent of checking generic boxes on a standardized form. It conveys zero actual depth.
Right. But today, she recognizes that personality is not a fixed label or a permanent state. It is a highly dynamic, constantly shifting combination of your core values, your daily habits, your underlying beliefs, and your emotional regulation patterns.
It's alive.
Exactly. She views identity as something that requires continuous, deliberate cultivation. It is developed through rigorous self-reflection, through the friction of our relationships with others, and through the intentional practice of choosing how we react to the world.
The source material leaves us with this incredibly powerful piece of advice. It says that the most meaningful conversations you will ever engage in, whether that's in a boardroom or in your personal life, are rarely just about the exchange of logistical facts.
Right.
They are about identity. They are about signaling your values, your purpose, and your capacity for growth. Language is so much more than just a utilitarian tool for transferring data. It is the primary mechanism through which we construct and express our evolving selves to the outside world.
And the study of emotional intelligence proves that every interaction is an opportunity to either build or erode trust. And the pursuit of self-awareness proves that any meaningful professional growth must always begin with an unflinching, honest audit of our own internal systems.
So the next time you find yourself in that high-stakes interview or a critical performance review, or frankly, even just sitting across the table on a first date.
Oh, that's a whole other deep dive.
Right. and someone asks you, how would you describe yourself? Resist the urge to just list a series of flat, polished adjectives. Do not just hand them a verbal resume of generic traits. Take a breath, engage that delay pedal, and tell them the story of the person you are actively becoming.
This raises an important question.
Hmm?
A thought I really want you to carry with you as you go about the rest of your day.
Yeah.
We discussed that international group earlier, and that one participant who demonstrated such incredible self-awareness by admitting, I'm collaborative, but I sometimes avoid difficult conversations.
Such a great quote.
It is. The source material asserts that our personalities do not grow in isolation. They are forged in the fires of our relationships and the challenges we face. If our identity is constantly being shaped by the boundaries we push and the conversations we are willing to have, what part of your personality remains completely undiscovered or entirely undeveloped simply because of the difficult conversations you are currently choosing to avoid?
Wow. If you never stress test the system, you'll never know what the hardware is actually capable of.
A profound realization to end on.
Truly. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this exploration into the psychology and the language of self-awareness helps you upgrade that internal operating system. Keep analyzing those emotional patterns, keep asking those thoughtful questions, and most importantly, keep growing. We will catch you on the next deep dive.